Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time you may be listening to this. I'm Mike Jones. I am the instructor of your GRCC Anatomy and Physiology course. We're going to dive right into the content now. Chapter 1 here. Now, I have to explain something. You'll notice this says Holes, Human Anatomy and Physiology. This is another textbook written by the same publishing company as yours, McGraw-Hill. You can see up there in the corner. These slides, I like the organization of these slides better than the slides that they provide for the textbook that you have. It's my choice to do it this way. Content is the same. You're not going to miss out on anything, but you will. Your textbook takes a very deep dive into certain subjects, and we will take that deep dive on some of those subjects. But on other subjects, I think they deep dive a little too much for an introductory course into anatomy and physiology. So I will select out those things, and I will let you know which of those things I think are important based on lecture content, and then I will send out specific documents related to what sections of your textbook I think are important and what sections you can leave out that I don't think are as important at this level. Right, so here's the slideshow. This is how it works. I go through the slides like this, and so we move on. Whoops, I got to get on to the actual slideshow, don't I? Right, and so I move through the slides, and I will help you to understand. Whoops, that is not what I wanted. Let's back up. I'm already messing up. There we go. This is what I wanted. My laser pointer. Right, so you're taking a course called Anatomy and Physiology. Of course, it deals with those two topics, but the reason we can put them together is because they're so intimately related to one another. Anatomy is the study of structure. Morphology is just another way of saying that. You're going to see terms like morphology, morphologic, histologic. We're going to talk about what those terms mean. You can study anatomy at what we refer to as the gross level. Now, you might think it's gross, but gross in this sense means the larger level, the bigger level. We're studying the shoulder or the head or the pelvic cavity or something like that, larger structures. But you can also study it at the cellular level. Cellular anatomy is important, and we're going to study that too. We're going to talk about that. Of course, anatomy influences physiology. Physiology is how does that structure work? How does the thing that we're studying, how does its anatomy influence its function? And its function is physiology. Of course, we're studying humans. That's why you're taking this course, human physiology. And so we will relate most of this stuff to humans. Most animals have very similar attributes, but how they process certain things is a little different than how you process certain things. But the concepts are the same. Now, of course, we'll focus on humans. All right, so there's a level of organization. In science, you must study the level of organization below your intended focus, and then you try to apply that level of organization up to a level above what you're trying to focus. So we're looking at anatomy and physiology. That really starts at the cellular level. Well, that means we have to go below the cellular level to really understand how these things work. How do these molecules interact with one another to create the function, the physiology that we're looking for? So that means we have to go down to the level of the subatomic particle. Now, if you were a physicist, you would laugh at this. You'd say protons, neutrons, electrons, that's it. There is a level even below that. We're not worried about that. We don't care. What we care about is protons, neutrons, and electrons make up atoms. Atoms are the tiny, obviously tiny particles, very, very small particles. They are the lowest level of what we would consider to be the material world. Right? Everything is made up of atoms. Atoms combine together to make molecules. Molecules are just atoms connected to each other in some fashion, in certain ways. And certain atoms can combine with other atoms in very, very special ways that make life possible. And that's the other thing you have to understand about how these chemicals work together. Macromolecules are just simply bunches of molecules strung together. And remember, a molecule, we're going to talk all about this, but a molecule is simply at least two atoms put together. When you have two atoms put together, we would call that a molecule. When you have many molecules put together, we refer to that as a macromolecule. We're going to study those things. And then, of course, all these join together into the organelle level, the cell level, tissue level, organs, organ systems, and finally an organism. That's you. You're an organism who has organ systems. In those organ systems, you have organs. In those organs are tissues, etc. You get it, right? This is how it goes. The levels of organization, and they are in this order, from smallest, subatomic, to organism, or organism to subatomic. Here's just a picture of that. Atoms joined together into molecules, molecules into bigger, larger structures called macromolecules. Then you have organelles, cells, tissues, organs, organ systems. The tissues and organs are not the same thing. Organs are made up usually of multiple tissues. So a particular tissue type is not an organ, but it is part of an organ. Now, the thing I like about this slideshow is that it has tables. There are tables all over the place. Tables are great for summarizing and putting into a succinct form all of the attributes of that of the thing it's defining. In this particular table, there's what we call a process. Now, what do we mean by a process? We mean what is going on? What is the characteristic? These are the characteristics of life. These are the things that define what life is according on Earth. Do these characteristics apply to other planets? We'll find out one day. But here on Earth, these are the things that define life. Okay? You must learn all of these things. I guarantee you there will be questions about this. All right? So, movement. Living things can move around. They respond. Responsiveness simply means they respond to their environment. They respond to changes in the environment, to light, to heat. You respond to changes in the environment. Are you hungry? Is it too bright? Is it too dim? You know, those are responses, or those are things that you stimulus, as we call it in biology. That's a stimulus. The stimulus is, it's too dark, I need a light on. You respond by turning a light on. Living things can grow. They get bigger. Multicellular organisms get more cells, right? You started off as a sperm and an egg. Those combined together into one cell. That one cell became trillions of cells that we call you. That's growth. Reproduction. That means that these living things can reproduce themselves. They can make more of themselves. However they do that, doesn't matter how they do it. They can do it. And frankly, you have to be able to. You know, if you're a living thing and you can't reproduce yourself, you're done. It's over. Respiration. Respiration for us means breathing, but respiration doesn't necessarily mean breathing in the sense of bringing oxygen into the body. Other organisms may breathe other chemicals, other things. There are bacteria that breathe methane. There are also bacteria that produce methane. So, you know, there's lots of ways that an organism can respire. Trees respire. Plants respire. Right? It just means that they exchange gases with the environment around them. Digestion, of course. In order to keep on living, you have to take some things in, and then that means you will have waste products to get rid of. Absorption simply means if you eat something, you have to be able to break it down into a usable product so that you can do something with it, mostly to create energy or to create more cells for you, to become you. So everything that you eat, you absorb it. Well, everything that can be absorbed, you absorb, and that thing, the absorbed material, molecules, becomes you. Literally, I'm not kidding about this. This is not a philosophical statement. This is, you literally becomes you. Circulation simply means movement of fluids around the cells of the body. Assimilation, you can change absorbed substances into different chemical forms, right? You can see light, but light stimulates certain kinds of cells, certain kinds of receptors in your retina, in your eye, and that is converted into an electrical form. So you go from photon energy to electrical energy to a nerve cell synapse, which is a chemical energy, and you're going to learn all about this stuff. So that is just these absorbed substances, as it says. We're changing them from one form to another form, one type of energy to another type of energy in order to get what we need out of that. And then excretion, of course, if you can't use it, you got to get rid of it. Or if you make a waste product, you got to get rid of it. You're making carbon dioxide inside your body all the time. You got to get rid of it. You can't have too much carbon dioxide in your body. So you have to excrete it. Breathe out. There you go. You just excreted. Now, how all this stuff works is called metabolism. Metabolism is taking things into your body, breaking them down into a usable form, using that stuff, and then getting rid of what you can't use. We'll talk all about metabolism. All right, so there are 5 things that you require to maintain life on this planet. I don't know about other planets. All I know is this planet. The life that we're defining here, especially think of mammals, mammalian life. Let's not get too deeply into viruses and bacteria and fungi and all these other. They're all living on, on one way or another. We can get it philosophical if we want to, but let's keep it hardcore. Mammals, okay? What do mammals need? Water. Number 1. Absolutely must have water. We're going to talk all about the chemical properties of water. Water is the coolest chemical ever. You may not think so as you start to study it. Trust me, it is. I'm going to move my face a little bit. I'm going to move me a little further into the slideshow. Right, so there's the characteristics of water. Food. Food, how do we define food? It's stuff that you can use for nutrition to keep your life force going, to keep your cells going. I don't want to get it life force. I don't want to get too much into the Force and Star Wars and all that stuff. That's cool. I love that stuff. But we're talking about hardcore chemistry, physics, biology right now. All right. Next up, you need, whoops, where'd I go? Here I am. Number 3 thing, you need oxygen. Of course you need oxygen. You already knew that. Heat. You got to have some form of heat. If there were no heat, or if things were constantly freezing cold, we couldn't have mammals. We have to have some degree of heat. Now, yes, there's a fairly wide range of temperatures that mammals can survive in. That's great. That's called adaptation. It's wonderful stuff. But if it's too cold or too hot, these mammalian forms cannot survive. And then pressure. Pressure means exactly that. You are being pushed on by the atmosphere around you right now. There is a certain pressure that you are experiencing. Of course, you don't notice it because you experience it 24/7. When you're in space, you don't have that pressure. You definitely notice that. That's why you have a space suit. Why do you have it? Because it exerts a pressure on you from inside the suit. If you didn't have that, you would have no pressure on you. Bad news. You can't survive. So as an astronaut, if you become an astronaut, wear your suit. Just trust me on that one. All right. Now, huge concept here. A concept, and you'll notice in the notes for this early introduction, The notes on homeostasis go on for several pages. I cannot overemphasize the importance of this term homeostasis. So homeostasis is exactly what it is defined there. The maintenance of a stable internal environment. Internal means inside you. Stable. You've got to maintain. So every test that can be tested in medicine, I can take your temperature, I can take your blood pressure, I can see how much hemoglobin you have in your blood. I just gave blood a week ago and they looked at how much hemoglobin I had. In case you're wondering, it's good. Hemoglobin's good. I'm happy about that. Anything that you can measure internally, that means every medical tests are measuring homeostasis. Every medical test has a low point and a high point, right? There's a level at which too little of that stuff is no good for life, and there's a level at which too much of that stuff, whatever you're measuring, is no good for that life. Okay, so blood pressure is a good example, right? If your blood pressure is too high and it goes up and it goes up and it goes up and it doesn't maintain a stable number, that leads to disease states, right? We call that, it leads to what we call cardiovascular diseases. If it's too low, you cannot maintain your upright status against gravity. So that means, what does it mean? It means you're going to faint. So if your blood pressure is too low, that's no good. If your blood pressure is too high, that's no good. You have to maintain homeostasis with blood pressure. Same way with body temperature. Same way with hemoglobin. Anything that you can measure inside your body, and there are dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of things that can be measured. There is a level, an acceptable level of that thing. And then that by definition means there is an unacceptable level of that thing. When you're in homeostasis, we define that as disease-free, I'll say. I mean, in the vernacular, you may change that definition, but in terms of medicine, in terms of physiology, if you are in homeostasis, you are healthy. If you are out of balance, out of homeostasis with whatever thing we're measuring, that is a diseased state by definition. Let me repeat that. If you are out of homeostatic balance, you are in a diseased state. That's what disease is being out of homeostatic balance, out of what we would consider to be normal for that organism. So your dog has a higher temperature than you do, but that's normal for dogs. If you ran the same temperature that a dog runs at, we would consider you sick. It's about 101, a little higher than that's 101 Fahrenheit. Centigrade, they're about 38, 39. You're about 37. So if you were at 39, you would feel sick, and we would consider that out of homeostasis. But for your dog, that's perfectly fine. Now, how does your body know whether you're in homeostasis or out of homeostasis? Well, you have to have it, just like your car knows that you're running out of gas, right? You have a gas gauge. That means there is something in your gas tank that is measuring how much gas is there. And then, right, so you have to have a receptor. There must be something that is sensitive to the thing that's being measured. All right? So the receptor detects and provides information. The receptor doesn't do anything about it. The receptor simply sends that information on to the control center. Control center, in most cases, is going to be the central nervous system. Somehow in the central nervous system, there is going to be some mechanism for detecting, is that normal? Is it not normal? And then there's going to be a defined pathway as to, if it's normal, keep going the way you're going. If it's not normal, do something about it. And the do something about it thing is what the effector does, the effector. E, make sure that you see that it's an E. You're going to see the same word, or a very similar word with an A in front of it, and that means something else. We'll get to that. So, 3 parts to maintain homeostasis? Well, first off, you have to have a stimulus, right? There has to be some stimulus that this receptor is measuring. There's something out there that the receptor is receiving. It sends information about that to the control center. The control center says things are good, things are bad, whatever. And then the effector either keeps it where it is or changes it in some way. And then the receptor will receive the new signal and sends it back to the control center. Around, 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 around you go with all of these things. So here it is in graphic form. Just how homeostatic mechanisms work. You have to have a stimulus. A stimulus is a change that occurs in the internal environment. The receptor receives the stimulus, sends a signal off to the control center. The control center has a set point. There's a normal set point at that control center. And of course, set points can be changed subtly over time. Now, of course, if nothing ever changed, we would say homeostasis. Well, if homeostasis was perfect and never ever changed, we would live forever. Of course, we know that things change over time. Gray hair? I wasn't born with gray hair. Trust me. I got gray hair. That's because the homeostatic mechanisms in my hair follicles has changed over time. Much to my chagrin, I'm not thrilled by that, but that's what happens. So it is true that homeostasis changes very subtly over time, and we call that aging. As you age, the homeostatic set points change slightly on some of these set points, not all of them. But at any given time, at any given moment, we're trying to keep things the same. So the process by which homeostatic mechanisms are kept in balance, for the most part, there's really two ways to do it. Well, there's only one way to really keep them in balance, and that is referred to as negative feedback. You cannot put emotional labels on these words. Negative does not mean bad. Negative feedback means it's a method to control the level of the thing that you're measuring. So this slide uses the example of the temperature of air in your house. Right? If you want room temperature to be 68 degrees, we'll say, you have a thermostat in your house. That's just a temperature control knob. That's all it is. But it is a measuring device. That's what it does. It's a receiver. It's a receptor. It takes the place of a biologic receptor. It's feeling the room all the time. Right? And then the temperature gets to 67, 66. Oh, 66, it says, no, that's too low. I got to do something. So it sends a signal to a control center. Where's the control center? Usually somewhere around the furnace. I mean, it could be in the box itself. The control center then decides, all right, I need to do something here. Send a signal off to my buddy, the furnace. Furnace turns on, heats the house. The receptor is still receiving 66, 67, 68. Boom, shut it off. Okay, we're good. That's called negative feedback. Not bad feedback. It's just negative in the sense that when the receptive signal is going down too low or too high, a signal is sent, the control center corrects it, and then that thing that you're measuring comes back into homeostatic balance and stays there until it either goes too low or too high again. Right, so negative feedback keeps things where they are. So they use the biologic example of body temperature. Similar process. Right? You got room temperature, you got body temperature. Here's body temperature 37°C. There are receptors. There are control centers. There are ways that your body changes your temperature and brings it back to 37°C. That's what it wants to do most of the time. Negative feedback is the way that happens. Now, there's another process. Positive feedback. Positive feedback is not good feedback, and negative feedback is not bad feedback. I'm going to keep hammering that into your heads. This has nothing to do with good and bad. In the sense of positive feedback, it's usually a process that has a fairly set endpoint. Right? You're looking for a particular outcome. So we usually use childbirth as the example, the biologic example of positive feedback. In this sense, they're using, the non-biologic example that they use is feedback from a microphone through an amplifier, and the amplifier amplifies the sounds again. It hears more static. Round and round it goes. You get feedback from the speakers through the microphone, and round and round and round. That's an awful sound. I think in a biologic sense, positive feedback of childbirth, I think, is a good example, because, of course, the idea is the uterus, and the uterus is very, very muscular. The muscular portion of the uterus will start to contract, and it starts to push the child out of the body. And you want to continue that process. You want those muscles to continue to push and basically squeeze the kid out of the body. And once it's done, that positive feedback loop continues until the child is born, and then there is no stretch receptor influence on the uterus now, because the uterus now is much smaller and is not being stretched. And so now those contractions stop. So a positive feedback loop has an endpoint. Whereas a negative feedback loop, there is no particular end point. There is simply the set level. As you can imagine, positive feedback loops are less common in the body than negative feedback loops. Negative feedback, there you go, most common form of homeostatic mechanisms. And they're called negative because the response to the change moves the variable in the opposite direction of the deviation from the set point. Now, I like this point a lot. Prevents sudden, severe changes in the body. We don't deal well with sudden, severe changes. You don't deal well with being in a sauna and then running out into the snow and rolling around. I mean, people do that, but not often. And it's exhilarating, but it's quite a shock to the body. So we want control. Positive feedback, there it is. The change or the deviation is intensified instead of reversed, right? So the uterus starts to squeeze. The detectors detect the squeezing of the uterus. They send a signal back to the central control mechanism. The central control mechanism says, I want more squeezing. Okay, I'm squeezing more. Sends a signal back to central control. The control mechanism says, more squeezing. More. Baby born. Okay, so that's the intro to how anatomy and physiology works together. We're going to get more detailed in that, all that kind of stuff. Now we kind of move on to how is the human body put together? How do we identify various parts of the body? How do we talk about the body? And the thing about anatomy and physiology too, but now we're really getting heavy into anatomy. And anatomy is a very rigidly defined thing in the body. So where things are in the body is very rigidly controlled by the words that we use. The reason it's done that way is because if you're going to go into any medical specialty, I don't care which one it is, we all want to be able to speak the same language. So if I say something, if I say the lateral epicondyle of the left humerus, every person knows exactly what I'm talking about. Every person who has been trained in this language, in this way of looking at the body, everyone knows. We all speak the same language. You have to speak it too. If you're going to speak it, you got to know it. Here we go. So we tend to divvy up humans into two big portions, right? We say the center of the body is called the axial portion. That consists of the head, neck, the trunk, and the pelvis. So we call that it's kind of the center of the body, if you will, if you want to think of it that way. Axial portion. The appendicular portion. The word appendicular comes from these things, and the things I'm sitting on, I'm not showing you. Legs, arms and legs. They are appendices, right? I have an appendage. I have an appendage here. This is my appendage. That's my left arm. That's an appendage. And I have a right arm, and I have a left leg and a right leg. Those are appendages. And so we refer to those as the appendicular portion of the human body. So upper and lower limbs. We're going to get into defining that. And in lab, you're really going to define that, especially when you get to the study of the skeleton. You're really going to talk very specifically about the axial portion and the appendicular portion of the skeletons and what bones are involved in those portions. Now, within bodies, there are spaces. Spaces in a human body are called cavities. Inside of cavities are things. We stuff things inside those cavities, but the cavities themselves have their own names. All right, so the cranial cavity, of course, that's up here. Cranial cavity houses your brain. Well, your brain connects to the rest of the nervous system and the rest of your body through the spinal cord, and the spinal cord goes through the vertebral canal, or also called the spinal cavity. So the spinal cord goes through the spinal cavity. Makes sense. The thoracic cavity, that's your chest. There's a lot of stuff inside your thoracic cavity. Houses the lungs, of course, and thoracic viscera. Now there's this term here, right? This term called viscera. You could better get used to that. Viscera simply means organs. Viscera are organs. So we refer to them as viscera. And the abdominopelvic cavity. Now that's what you would call your stomach, but it is not. That's before you study anatomy, you refer to that area as your abdomen or your stomach. Well, now it's your abdominopelvic cavity. And of course there are abdominal and pelvic viscera in there. There are organs specific to those areas inside these spaces. So now we got to talk about it more specifically. The diaphragm is a muscle, what we call the thoracic diaphragm. That is a muscle that is at the bottom portion of the thoracic cavity. It actually separates the thoracic cavity from the abdominopelvic cavity. We'll talk more about the diaphragm in time, but it is a muscle. It's a muscular dividing line, if you will. Primary muscle of breathing, of course, is the diaphragm. This word that you see there, the mediastinum or mediastinum, you're going to find people pronounce medical words in slightly different ways. This one is one of those words. So the mediastinum is the space in between the lungs in the thoracic cavity. Why is that important? Because there's a lot of really, really important structures inside the mediastinum. Such as what, you ask? Oh, the heart, the esophagus, the trachea, the thymus gland, the aorta, the pulmonary trunk, you name it. Tons of very important structures inside there. But it's just called the mediastinum because it is in between the lungs, in the thoracic cavity. The abdominopelvic cavity, of course, as you can imagine, there's two parts to that. The abdominal cavity and the pelvic cavity. And we just smash them together because there's no structure that divides those two cavities from each other. But there are distinct structures that are found in each portion. And you can read them there. Here's pictures. You have this in your book. These are the exact things that we just talked about. Right? Cranial cavity, there's your brain up there. vertebral cavity, or vertebral canal is the spinal cavity. These are considered to be posterior cavities because they're in the back of the body. Right, they're back there. Whereas up front in the anterior cavities would include the thoracic cavity, the abdominopelvic cavity. And as I said, we can split up the thoracic cavity into these two big spaces. The space where the lungs are, that's in the thoracic cavity. And then the space in between the lungs, which is in here, and that's called the mediastinum, or mediastinum. Remember, the diaphragm divides the thoracic cavity from the abdominopelvic cavity. All right. Now there are smaller cavities. You have lots of spaces all over the place in the body. The skull is full of them, actually. You still have, of course, the cranial cavity back there. That's where your brain is. You have sinuses. Sinuses are hollow spaces that don't house any particular viscera. We wouldn't say there are any viscera inside your sinuses, but they are hollow spaces. There's 4 of those. We'll get to that more specifically. The orbital cavities. Orbital cavities are where your eyes are. Your eyes sit inside your orbital cavities inside your skull. And then, of course, you have an oral cavity. The oral cavity, you're going to call it your mouth. Not anymore. You're going to call it the oral cavity now. Right. Now, I seem to be getting myself in the way here. I'll move there. All right. Next up. We've talked about one of these already. There's thoracic and there are abdominopelvic membranes. Oh, no, I'm sorry. We haven't talked about these. Never mind. Thoracic and abdominopelvic membranes. So membranes, in the body sense, in the human body sense, what we're talking about is a two-membrane or a double-layer membrane system. There's a specific reason to have these. And it's written right up there. But these are found, there's really 3 of these serous membranes that are extremely important, unbelievably important, in the function of those tissues that they're wrapped around. And I said there are two layers of these membranes. The layer that is closest to the organ itself is called the visceral layer. Remember, I already told you about this word viscera. Right? So the word viscera simply means the organ itself. Sorry, a little brief interruption there. My daughter had to get something out of the freezer behind me. So, where was I? Oh yes, thoracic and abdominal pelvic membranes. So these are serous membranes. I told you about the viscera. Viscera is an organ. So the visceral layer of this membrane system, is attached really strongly, tightly attached to the organ itself. So it could be attached to the heart, could be attached to the lungs, could be attached to the intestines. The outer layer is called the parietal layer. Now these layers are not that far apart from each other. I mean, we make it sound like, ooh, there's a layer way over here and a layer way over there. Now they're pretty close together. In between these 2 layers, and this is the reason they're called serous membranes, they make a fluid called a serous fluid. And a serous fluid is like oil, very slick, very slippery, and that allows the organ that's attached to move around and to slide. So when you're breathing, your lungs are expanding. As they expand, they're sliding on the inside of your rib cage. Well, thank goodness you have a serous membrane there that allows that sliding without friction, without irritation, without rubbing, and allows it to expand and contract. You don't notice it, right? Because you don't feel anything. So when it's operating normally, that's what these membranes are for, to allow things to move around and slide past other things without getting caught, without having friction. There are disease states that are associated with serous membrane problems, and we'll talk about some of those later. But the inner layer is called the visceral layer, the outer layer is called the parietal layer. In between, they're close together, there's a slippery fluid called a serous fluid. The three biggies are referred to as the pleura, the pericardium, and the peritoneum. Trouble. Immediate trouble here. I'll look over my glasses for this. Problem here is that each one of these is a P word. P, P, P. Pleura, pericardium, peritoneum. They are in distinctly different parts of the body. They have the same function, so physiologically they function the same. Anatomically they're very similar. Morphologically they're similar. However, they are associated with distinct organ systems. Pleura with lungs, pericardium with the heart, and peritoneum with the abdominal organs, abdominal viscera. And here they are. This is just a general view of these things. They're harder to see than you imagine, only because they're so close together and they're so thin. But say, for example, here they show you we've taken a slice across, and we're going to talk about what these slices are called. So we take a slice across the body and we flip it upright. So now you're looking down on this person's lungs and their heart. Right? So here's a lung. Here's a lung. Here's the heart. Around each lung is the pleura. The pleura is that serous membrane, two-layer serous membrane surrounding the lung. So, of course, visceral pleura is close to the lung, and parietal pleura is away from the lung, or slightly away from the lung. And in between those two is called a pleural cavity. That's where the serous fluid is. That's where this slick, slippery stuff is, and allows your lungs to slide around as you're breathing. Same thing over here in the digestive system. It's the same stuff. You have a parietal layer, you have a visceral layer, you have serous fluid in between. So there's pictures of that stuff. Okay. So now we switch gears again. The gears here are related to you have several organ systems. Organ systems are systems that work together to achieve a particular goal for your body. There are 11 of these. 11 that you have to know. 11 organ systems that you have to know. First one we always start with is the integumentary system. You're going to say, oh, that's skin. And I'm going to say, that's cute. Skin. So much more than skin. But yeah, okay, fine. But you can't call it skin here. It is the integumentary system. All right, that's number one. Next up, the skeletal system. This one you probably knew about. You probably called it the skeletal system. So you won't have to change anything. Skeletal system. Next up, muscular system. I'll move. Whoops, I guess I can't. Oh, where'd I go? Uh-oh. I've disappeared. Oh, there I am. Ha! Oh, boy. Technical difficulties. Anyway, muscular system. Okay? Obviously, moves you around. This is your primary source of heat, though. So, while muscles, you'll think of them as moving your skeleton around, the other big important job, or at least one of the other big important jobs, is to maintain your heat production so that you can maintain your homeostatic mechanisms for temperature. Now, this slide tends to put the nervous and the endocrine systems together. They're really separate systems. You have a nervous system and you have an endocrine system. But they do work together very intimately to maintain, to integrate, coordinate organ function through nerve impulses or hormones. Right? So they're really two separate systems, but they do work very closely together. Of course, cardiovascular system. Every time we refer to this, we're going to refer to the cardiovascular system. That means the heart and the blood vessels, arteries and veins. They have to work together. You can't have one without the other. You can have a heart. If you don't have vessels, your heart's useless. It's pumping blood nowhere. If you have vessels but no heart, there's nothing pumping. Got to have both. Lymphatic system. This is the obviously the transportation of fluids, lymphocytes, productions, body defenses. Fat absorption is another role of the lymphatic system. It's another tube system in your body, but different than the cardiovascular system. But still, it shuttles very important fluids around your body as well. Digestive system, of course, includes all of the digestive organs, anything that it is involved in taking in food, tearing it apart down to its basic pieces that you can use, getting rid of the stuff that you can't use. Respiratory system, of course, exchange of gases with the external world. Urinary system, of course, involves the kidneys, urinary bladder, processing wastes in the body, regulate electrolyte, water balance, blood pressure. Yes, the urinary system regulates your blood pressure. Didn't know that, probably, did you? And then the reproductive system. If there is one system, maybe I can move myself over here. If there is one system that I would say does not contribute, or maybe contributes less to your own well-being, the well-being of the individual, it would be the reproductive system. Now, of course, the reproductive system does do good things for the other systems, and it is integrated. But the reproductive system is really about, not so much about you as it is about continuing the species. We collectively as a species must have reproductive systems. But you as an individual, you could probably get by without most of your reproductive organs. You'd live a fine life without them. Now, don't go into philosophy class or psychology and tell them, oh, my professor says that we don't need it. I'm just saying from a physiologic sense, you could get away without it. All right, so here they are, all lined up, listed. I'm always in the way here. Holy cow. Here they are, 11 systems. Here's what they do, the major organs that are included in those and the major functions. And it's pretty remarkable to look at all of the things that all of these different systems do and the multiple tasks that each organ system has. There is no organ system in the body that has one task. They have multiple tasks. Right, lifespan changes. You're going to see this at the end of every slideshow. Lifespan changes. Of course, these are changes in the homeostatic set point of these particular changes. We call it aging. Right? So aging involves these kinds of changes. We may not like those changes that occur. I don't like some of the things that have happened as I age, but some of the things that have changed I do like. So frankly, it doesn't matter whether you like it or not. If you continue to age, these are the things that can change. These homeostatic set points will change. Now, this is a very generic list of things that change over time. You can read through those. I really want to move on to this. This is extremely important. You must understand anatomical terminology. You have to practice it. You have to understand it. You'll do this a ton in lab, but you should really practice this all the time. So the first thing you have to do, and I said this in my lecture notes. I said on the very last page of this thing, I said you got to know the anatomical position. And I said the first thing is standing erect. Yes, stand up, get up. I mean it right now. Get up. So I'm going to get up. The problem here is that my microphone and my earbuds, the cord isn't long enough, and so you're going to lose me in terms of my voice but that's okay. Temporarily, right? So, get up. You should get up anyway. I'm a physical therapist. As a physical therapist, people do not get up. They sit at their computers way too long. You got to move around. I mean, get up. Come on, people. There it is. Anatomical position. Palms. Okay. The anatomical position is not complicated. It's not hard to understand. But it determines, this position determines how we talk about all of the rest of the body and where things are in relation to other things in your body. So, for example, your head. Your head is above, your head's above everything else. Your head is above, your head's on top of everything else. So we say that the head is, oh dear Lord, have mercy. Wow, okay. My computer's doing something weird. Hang on a second. Sorry for that interruption. My computer was giving me updates and messages about something that I needed to correct. Okay, so anatomical position. You must understand this. So it doesn't matter what position you are in. If you are standing on your head, we still, in medicine, we would still say that your head is superior to all other body parts, or superior to your neck, or superior to your chest. Yes, you're going to say, no, but I'm upside down. I don't care. I don't care. I don't care. Let me say that one more time. I don't care. Medicine doesn't care. It's not about me. It's about medicine. Medicine says, this is the position. This position that you see right in front of you, the anatomic position, defines and describes all of our terminology that we use to talk about the place, some place on a human body. Now, next. I'll move myself over here. Yeah. So, I said anatomic position defined. So here's a bunch of terms. These terms relate to the anatomic position. So, superior, above, and inferior, below. My head is superior to my neck, even if I'm upside down, even if I am walking around like on 4 legs like my dog does. My head is still superior, so that's how we refer to it, as superior to the neck. Anterior, posterior, or ventral and dorsal, these are interchangeable terms. Defined by the anatomic position. If I am lying on my back, I'm lying on my posterior or my dorsal surface, and that my ventral surface is toward the front of my body. If I'm standing up, it's toward the front of my body and the back of my body. If I'm spinning around in space in 0 gravity, it's still the same. Medial and lateral. Medial is anything toward the midline. Lateral is away from the midline. So, here's a complicated one, or here, well, it's not complicated, but here's one that throws people for a loop. In the anatomic position, my thumbs point to the outside of my body. That means my thumbs are lateral. My thumbs are lateral to my pinkies. Digit number 5 is your pinky. Digit 5 is always medial to digit 1. Always. Now, of course, if I'm in anatomic position, my palms are forward, and you'll say, oh yes, I understand it, I got it. Thumb lateral, pinky medial. How about now? It's still the same. We still refer to the thumb. Digit 1 is lateral to digit 5. But you're going to say, but Mike, it's closer to the midline of my body. Not from the anatomical position, it's not. Anatomical position is your ultimate reference point. So, if I do this, my thumb is lateral, and you can say, oh yes, I got it. If I do this, my thumb is still lateral. If I do this, my thumb is still lateral. If I do this, my thumb is still lateral. It doesn't matter. Anatomic position, that's the reference point. Here they are. So, terms like, for example, medial and lateral. Medial and lateral can be 1 millimeter apart. If something is 1 millimeter closer to the center of the body, it is medial. It is in the medial direction to the other thing that is in the lateral direction. Medical reports are full of this kind of terminology. Full. Cram-packed. Medial and lateral, proximal and distal. Again, proximal and distal can be very, very tiny distances, or they can be longer distances. My shoulder is proximal to my elbow, but my elbow is proximal to my hand. Or my hand is distal to the elbow. So you have to get comfortable with these, using these terms. And then practice using these terms. All right, now, we also define sections or planes of the body. Now, in my business, as a physical therapist, in my business, we define movements based on these sections or planes of the body. So there's 3 of them. There's 3 planes. There's three cardinal planes. You know, if you've taken any algebra, you know the planes in the universe and the graphing things out, right? You have the x plane, x, y, and z, or x, y, and z axes. Right? So these define the 3-dimensional world. Well, in the body, we have a 3-dimensional world as well. But we call the plane that goes from the front of your body to the back of your body, or the anterior to posterior, or posterior to anterior, we define that as the sagittal plane. What a sagittal plane does is, if it cuts you, if you had a big knife, you could slice me in a sagittal plane, you would have a left part of my body and a right part of my body. If that section, if there's a very, very special section of the sagittal plane that's called the mid-sagittal plane, or the median plane. The median plane splits me right down the middle and makes me a roughly even left half and right half. So that's the only plane that can do that. You can't split yourself into an even upper half and lower half, or an even front half and a back half. But you can split yourself into pretty much an even right half and left half. That is called the median plane that does that. Sometimes called the mid-sagittal plane. But there are other sagittal planes. Any other sagittal plane is called a parasagittal plane, or parasagittal section. That splits you into a right portion and a left portion, but it could split me here at the shoulder. So certainly not even, but part of me would be on the right side and part of me would be on the left side. All right, next plane, transverse or the horizontal plane. That's the one that comes right through your body and splits you into an upper part and a lower part. Now you can have a transverse plane anywhere. I could have a transverse plane at my knees, or at my hips, or at my thorax, or at my neck, or right through my head. I can have a transverse or horizontal plane or section. It just splits me into an upper part and a lower part. And then the final one is called the coronal or frontal plane. That's the one that can split me front to back. So I'm going to move my arms. If I move my arms in this direction, I am moving my arms in the frontal plane or coronal plane. They're used interchangeably. So you have to get used to these planes. And so this allows us, so for example, if you were getting an MRI or a CAT scan of somebody, that machine will take pictures, the kind of pictures that it takes. It takes pictures of your body in these various planes, in these various sections. and it allows us to identify very specifically where something is in the body. And here they are in picture form, right? So we slice it through the middle of your body, we get a transverse plane. We slice you front to back along a sagittal plane, you get pictures that look like this. Now in this particular one, they're telling you specifically this is a median plane. The median plane is very special. It means that they have sliced it right down the middle of the body, right in the exact center, as we can define center of the body. And then frontal plane, here's a frontal plane picture of a knee. You're looking at, because it's going through the frontal plane, you can say, well, here's the front of the knee, and then the other side would be the back of the knee. So you have to practice these terms, practice moving your body in these directions, and then call out those planes, or tell your friend, hey, move your left arm in the sagittal plane. And he'd go, he might not make that sound I just made, which is kind of weird, but so this is what they look like, right? If you do a test, or if you do a cadaver study, right? If I were to look at a brain and I were going to slice it in the sagittal section, I'd actually say this is a median plane, because it's pretty good. It's pretty right in the center, I'd say. Right, so this would be a sagittal section, yes, but I would say it's more specifically the median plane. So you're looking at the brain from that angle. If I do a transverse section, I've cut the top part of the brain off, and now I'm looking at the bottom part of the brain. And then here, a frontal section or a coronal section, I'm looking at either the front or the back. So this is what the machines do. They take these sections, and then we can study various things. So you can see different structures in each of these. You can see the same structures, and you can see different structures, and you can see them in a different way for each plane. This is what's beautiful about medical tests, is that we can look at these things and get a sense of what these structures look like in these three different planes. This is what happens when you cut things in these various planes. Okay, so if you have a cross section, so we would say a cross section is a transverse plane. Generally speaking, we're cutting something in a horizontal plane, but this has the special name of cross section. You're gonna take this up in the lab even more fully. If it's not straight across, if it's at a slight angle, we call that an oblique section. Oblique sections can be very, very angled or barely angled. The angle doesn't matter. It's still oblique. If it's not clean straight across, then it's oblique. And if it goes right down the middle and splits it in, you would say, in half, then we would call that a longitudinal section. So whenever we look at the tubes of the body, and we're gonna see this all the time, blood vessels, urinary tract, lymphatic vessels. Whenever we slice something, bones, whenever we slice it, you can see different things in different angles, in different sections. And you have to be able to mentally understand what we're talking about. If I say, oh, here's a longitudinal section through a ureter, here's what we see, and you have to go, okay, I know what that is now. I got it. Because I'm not, at that point, I'm not going to spend time saying, oh, remember back when we talked about sections. I'm going to move on. Now, we divvy up the body, especially the abdominopelvic region, into what we refer to as either a region or a quadrant. Now, a quadrant would be specifically 4 regions, because that's what quad means. If you have a quad runner, it's got 4 wheels on it. If you're a quadruped, you got 4 legs, like your dog does. So quad means 4. So yes, we divvy up the abdominal pelvic region into 4 quadrants, and they are named. I'm going over this one first, even though it's labeled as B. I'm going over it first because it's easier to understand, because you got 4 quadrants, and that's what they're called. the right upper quadrant, the right lower quadrant. Guess where those are? Left upper quadrant, left lower quadrant. Within those quadrants are specific anatomical items, and there are specific things that can happen. So, for example, if you have gallbladder problems, gallbladder issues, typically you will have right upper quadrant pain. And right shoulder pain often goes along with that too. But if you have appendicitis, usually that is a right lower quadrant problem. So we can sort of divvy up medical problems based on the place in the abdominal pelvic region that we might find that. A more thorough slicing up or region identification system is what we call abdominal regions. And you see there's 9 of them now. It looks like a checkerboard. Or not a checkerboard, geez, tic-tac-toe board. Thank you very much. Tic-tac-toe. Right, so these have different names. They are still called, the right regions are called right, and left regions are called left. But they have different names to them, and they're associated with different kinds of things because we're divvying up, we're dividing things a little bit more thoroughly. Right, so we have the right hypochondriac region and the left hypochondriac region. Those are the upper parts. Then you go down to the left lateral and right lateral. That sort of makes sense. And then you go further on down to the right inguinal and left inguinal. So those are the rights and lefts. In the middle, we call them something else. We call them the epigastric, the umbilical. Umbilical might be easy to remember, belly button. And pubic region. Right. So you have to study these. You have to, yes, you have to memorize these. We will get to the significance and the organs and the problems that are found in each of these areas based on its anatomy. Oh, that's it. Well, okay. So that ends Lecture 1, Session 1. You're going to have to review this stuff. I have mentioned to you in notes and in the first introductory lecture, I've mentioned to you how summary slides, how summary documents, how even studying this lecture is extremely important, but it is not enough. The detail that you need, we haven't really hit huge detail yet, but we're gonna. Next lecture, yeah, big time detail. So you must use your textbook voraciously. That is where all of this detail is found. I will be more specific. I will send out some documents telling you what kind of detail or what sections you don't need to know about. I know you would like to see all of Chapter 2. Forget that. You don't have to know anything about it. There is going to be some overlap between lab and lecture. That's inevitable, but I think it's valuable because it helps you to make that, to bridge the gap. And that's important. All right, so that's it for Lecture 1. I will close this off, and pretty soon, Lecture number 2, dealing with most of Chapter 2, will come up soon. Thanks for your attention. Have a great day. See you later.